Welcome back, everyone. Lance Scurv X here, the Scurv Podcast, lancescurvx.com. Make sure to hit that site and add your email address in to get everything that we can't show here on social media. Anyway, this segment is titled, Why Do They Push Harder When You Pull Away? How to Make Toxic People Lose Control Without Arguing. Most people spend their lives believing that every attack deserves a response. They think every disrespectful comment must be corrected. Every lie must be challenged. Every manipulative person must be confronted head-on. But what many fail to realize is that some people are not looking for understanding. They are looking for access to your emotions, access to your peace, access to your attention. And once they gain that access, they slowly begin to drain you while pretending the entire problem is somehow your fault. The truth is painful because many good-hearted people were raised to believe that explaining themselves proves maturity. They were taught that if someone misunderstands them, they should clarify things until the issue is resolved. But toxic people do not operate through resolution. They operate through emotional control. They survive off confusion, tension, guilt, and emotional reactions. They need you emotionally involved because the moment you emotionally disconnect, their power begins to collapse. That is why so many people walk away from certain conversations feeling exhausted, frustrated, anxious, and mentally drained. It was never a healthy exchange to begin with. It was a setup. The toxic individual already understood one thing from the beginning. If they can control your emotional state, they can control the direction of the interaction. Once you react emotionally, they are no longer responding to you. They are steering you. Most people never notice this because they stay focused on the words being said instead of the emotional game being played underneath those words. Toxic individuals know exactly how to provoke insecurity, frustration, guilt, or anger. Sometimes they do it loudly. Sometimes they do it quietly. Sometimes they use criticism. Sometimes they use silence. Sometimes they use fake concern, but the goal is always the same. They want your reaction because your reaction becomes their fuel. The dangerous part is that many people do not even realize how much of their energy is being consumed until they finally stop participating in the cycle. Once they stop feeding the drama, stop over-explaining, stop trying to convince people who already made up their minds, they suddenly notice something shocking. Their peace starts returning. Their anxiety decreases. Their emotional exhaustion fades. And they finally understand that the battle was never about winning an argument. The battle was about protecting their spirit. Toxic people are not as powerful as they appear. Their strength usually comes from borrowed energy. They depend on your emotional reactions to keep their influence alive. Every defensive response you give them becomes proof that they can still reach inside your emotional space. Every angry outburst confirms that they still have access to your nervous system. Every long explanation tells them that you are still trying to gain approval from someone who was never interested in fairness in the first place. This is why arguing with manipulative people often feels endless, because it is. You explain yourself clearly, but somehow the conversation becomes more confusing. You defend yourself honestly, but somehow you end up feeling guilty anyway. You try to stay calm, but the tension keeps increasing. This happens because logic was never the true goal. Emotional engagement was the goal from the very beginning. Toxic individuals study reactions the same way predators study movement. They watch your tone. They watch your facial expressions. They notice when your breathing changes. They pay attention to hesitation in your voice. They look for signs of emotional vulnerability because those signs reveal where pressure can be applied next. The moment they detect insecurity, frustration, and emotional instability, they push harder. This is why many people feel trapped around manipulative personalities. They think the problem is the words being said, but the real problem is the emotional loop being created. The toxic person throws out bait. The other person reacts emotionally. The toxic person studies that reaction and escalates. Then the cycle repeats again and again until one person feels mentally exhausted. But the cycle only survives if both people continue participating in it. The moment you stop reacting emotionally, the structure begins to crack. Suddenly, the toxic person loses the emotional feedback they were using to guide the interaction. They become uncertain. They push harder at first because they expect the old reaction to eventually return. Many people fail during this stage because they mistake escalation for strength, but escalation is often a sign that the strategy is no longer working. When toxic people feel themselves losing emotional control over someone, they often become louder, more dramatic, more insulting, and more manipulative. They increase pressure because pressure used to work before. But if you remain emotionally steady, something fascinating begins to happen. Their behavior starts collapsing under its own weight because there is no longer any emotional fuel feeding it. Society has trained many people to fear silence. Silence makes people uncomfortable because silence removes distraction. Most people think silence means surrender. They think silence means weakness, but controlled silence is the most powerful form of emotional discipline a person can develop. Toxic individuals depend heavily on conversation because conversation gives them opportunities to manipulate, twist words, create confusion, and provoke reactions. The more you talk emotionally, the more material they gain to work with. They do not care whether you are right or wrong. They care whether you are emotionally invested. This is why silence disrupts them so deeply. When you stop rushing to defend yourself, you remove the emotional doorway they normally use to enter your mind. When you stop over-explaining yourself, you remove their ability to keep dragging the conversation in circles. When you remain calm while they attempt to provoke you, you quietly communicate something powerful without saying a word. You're showing them that your emotional state no longer belongs to them. Controlled silence is very different from fearful silence. Fearful silence comes from insecurity and emotional shutdown. Controlled silence comes from awareness and emotional stability. Your body remains relaxed. Your breathing stays steady. Your facial expressions remains neutral. There is no panic, no desperation, no emotional performance. You simply refuse to participate in a dynamic designed to drain you. This kind of silence forces toxic individuals into unfamiliar territory. Suddenly, they are left alone with their own behavior, without your emotional reactions guiding the interaction. They lose direction. They may attempt stronger insults. They may try guilt. They may even pretend to be the victim. But if your silence remains consistent, their usual methods slowly lose effectiveness. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them without emotional interference. And many toxic individuals cannot tolerate that reflection for very long because they depend on emotional chaos to avoid confronting themselves. Many people believe boundaries only matter if they are loudly announced. They think strength means constantly warning people about what they will not tolerate. But toxic individuals often ignore spoken boundaries because spoken boundaries can be debated, challenged, manipulated, or worn down over time. Real boundaries are built through behavior. A person who constantly says, "Don't disrespect me," while continuing to tolerate disrespect teaches others that the boundary is flexible. Toxic individuals study inconsistency carefully. They look for emotional cracks. They test how much pressure it takes before someone gives in. Every emotional reaction becomes information. This is why unspoken boundaries are often more powerful than verbal ones. Instead of announcing every limit, you simply change your behavior. If someone becomes disrespectful, you disengage. If someone repeatedly manipulates conversations, you stop feeding those conversations. If someone thrives on emotional drama, you stop providing emotional energy. Simple as that. No long speeches, no emotional performances, no endless warnings. Just consistency. Toxic individuals become deeply uncomfortable around consistency because consistency removes confusion. They cannot manipulate clear patterns. If your response remains emotionally stable every single time, eventually they begin realizing there are no emotional openings available anymore. This requires enormous self-control because human beings naturally want to defend themselves. We want to be understood. We want fairness. We want truth to win. But toxic dynamics are rarely built around truth. They are built around emotional access. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop trying to convince people who already benefit from misunderstanding them. That level of emotional discipline changes everything. One of the greatest misunderstandings in modern life is the belief that every conflict deserves engagement. Sometimes the strongest move is refusing to enter the fight at all. Non-engagement is not weakness. It is strategic emotional protection. Toxic behavior depends on participation. Without your reaction, without your emotional investment, without your willingness to stay trapped in the cycle, the behavior slowly loses structure. It becomes unstable because it no longer receives reinforcement. Think about how many arguments continue only because both sides keep feeding energy into them. One person attacks, the other person defends. Then comes counterattacks, explanations, emotional escalation, guilt, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. The cycle keeps growing because both people remain emotionally connected to the conflict. Non-engagement cuts the oxygen supply, and it cuts it quick. This does not mean becoming emotionless or pretending nothing affects you. It means choosing carefully where your energy goes. Not every insult deserves your attention. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every manipulative tactic deserves emotional participation. The moment you stop trying to win toxic conversations, you begin winning your peace back instead. Many people struggle with this because they feel guilty for emotionally disconnecting. They feel they are being rude, cold, or weak. But protecting your mental stability is not cruelty. Constant emotional exhaustion should never become the price you pay to prove you are a good person. Some individuals will never be satisfied regardless of how respectfully you explain yourself. Some people do not want solutions. They want access to your emotions. And once you understand that truth deeply, your entire approach to difficult people changes forever. Most people focus only on verbal communication while completely ignoring the power of presence. But toxic individuals often pay more attention to your energy than your words. Your body language reveals emotional information constantly. Your posture, your breathing, your eye contact, your tone, your facial expressions. These signals communicate whether you feel emotionally stable or emotionally shaken. When people become reactive, their body often reveals it immediately. They tense up, their breathing changes, their tone sharpens, their movements become rushed. Toxic individuals notice these changes because those changes tell them their behavior is having an emotional impact on you. But when your body language stays grounded, calm, and emotionally neutral, the entire interaction changes. You stop looking emotionally available for manipulation. This does not mean pretending to be fearless. It means learning how to stabilize yourself internally, even when tension exists externally. Slow breathing matters. Calm posture matters. Controlled movement matters. Emotional steadiness matters. The goal is not to dominate the other person. The goal is to remain connected to yourself. That inner control creates emotional distance between the trigger and your response. And inside that distance is where your power lives. The more emotionally grounded you become, the more clearly you begin seeing toxic behavior for what it truly is. Predictable emotional manipulation, searching for reinforcement. Once you see the pattern clearly, it loses much of its power over you. Believe that. Every toxic dynamic survives through repetition. Repeated reactions, repeated emotional access, repeated participation. The moment repetition breaks, the structure weakens. At first, the toxic individual must intensify their behavior. They may push harder because the old strategy stopped working. This phase confuses many people because they assume the situation is getting worse. In reality, the old system is failing. Think about it carefully. If someone has spent years controlling interactions through emotional reactions, they will naturally panic when those reactions disappear. They may try different approaches: anger, guilt, victimhood, fake kindness, increased pressure. But all of these are attempts to regain emotional access. If you return to emotional engagement during this stage, you accidentally teach them that persistence still works. But if your emotional steadiness remains consistent, eventually one of two things happens. Either the toxic individual adjusts their behavior because the manipulation no longer produces results, or they slowly distance themselves because the emotional reward disappeared. Either way, your peace begins returning. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Real power was never about controlling another person. Real power was learning how to stop surrendering control of yourself. The world is full of people who will gladly consume your emotional energy if you allow them to. Some do it consciously, others do it naturally through unresolved pain and unhealthy patterns. But regardless of the reason, you must eventually decide how much access others deserve to your peace. Not every battle deserves your presence. Not every attack deserves your explanation. Sometimes the strongest response is emotional discipline so solid that manipulation finds nothing to attach itself to anymore. People who thrive on drama often become uncomfortable around calm individuals because calm people cannot be easily controlled. Emotional steadiness breaks manipulation patterns in ways arguments never could. Your silence is not weakness when it's intentional. Your boundaries are not weakness when they are consistent. Your non-engagement is not weakness when it protects your peace. In many situations, these are the highest forms of emotional intelligence a person can practice. The moment you stop feeding toxic dynamics, you begin reclaiming your mental clarity, your emotional stability, and your personal power. And once you experience that freedom, you realize something life-changing. Peace is not found in controlling difficult people. Peace is found in no longer allowing difficult people to control you. Thank you for being here. I hope something inspired you within this. If you have a controlling person around you, it's all in your hands and you have the power. Never forget that. That's what this piece was all about. Let me know what you think. Leave something in the comments. I feed off of the comments and you help to fuel me and guide me and inspire me to do more. And make sure to go to lancescurvx.com so we can have a direct relationship and connection through email that no social media can break. Much love to you all. On to the next one. And as always, Lance Scurv out. Peace.